everyone. My name is Teresa, and I'm a policy advisor here at CalRecycle. So next, we're going to talk a little bit about policy, and I just want to bring us back to why we're here today. So as a state agency, CalRecycle, our mission is resource conservation. And for those who are not familiar with us, we run recycling programs such as recycling tires, e-waste, beverage containers. We have a robust organics regulation happening right now. And we have a statewide target of 75% recycling, composting, and source reduction by 2020. And we're currently only at 42% right now, and this is year 2019. So we have a lot of work to do, and we're just trying to look at everything in our waste stream. And as Tracy mentioned earlier this morning, textile is 4% of the waste stream. So, we're interested in exploring what are the barriers for recycling, what are the technology barriers, what are the economic barriers, and what are the policy barriers. So up next, we're going to have, I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Joanne Brasch, who will discuss some of the policy options with us. She has a PhD in textile economics and environmental analysis from the University of California, Davis, and she's also received a master's degree in textile science. She has more than 12 years of academic work experience, has been a lecturer at Davis, CSU Sacramento, and in Shanghai, China. And she's also a sustainability researcher at the University of Davis Health Systems. And she's a special project manager at the California Product Stewardship Council and the National Stewardship Action Council to lead projects that promotes circular economy using product stewardship and extended producer responsibility. So please welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for staying through the end. I know the World Cafe coming up next, the discussions can be really robust and exciting. So take the next 20 minutes to really talk about what are the policy options that we have in driving circularity. So I know that the topic might be a little broad in terms of policies, but know that this presentation is really gonna focus on how do we drive circularity, increase recycling, and increase source reduction, everything on the waste hierarchy. So as Teresa introduced me, I do have a PhD in textile economics and environmental analysis. I am the only one in the world that has that. Individual program sponsored by Textiles, environmental policy, and industrial ecology. So again, 12 years of research experience. I teach in UC Davis in the Department of Textiles. I see some of my former colleagues and classmates. Go Aggies. We're one of 4 textile science programs in the United States. And believe me when I say the world of textile science is very small. I have seen, like I said, students, colleagues, all in this room. I'm really excited for us to all work together in moving forward. My area of expertise, though, is not fashion. Although most of my students do go into fashion, my research is actually in hospital trash. So I'd like to take a moment and thank everyone who commented on the textile products in our waste stream that are beyond the fashion industry. As you can see in this picture, actually, for several years, I was the sustainability researcher for the Davis Health System, charged with getting us to zero waste as a hospital system, as part of the UC system, and believe me, every barrier I hit was related to policy. So what can we do to actually intervene on these systems to actually drive it forward and increase sustainability? So I work for the California Product Stewardship Council. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. You can see we're small but mighty. We have grown to about 7 staff now. You might know us from passing some really famous and hard lifts, including the first in the world medicine and sharps needle disposal bill that passed in 2018. So although I'm up here talking about textiles and most of my academic experiences in textiles, we work with lots of hard to manage products. Solar panels, medicines, needles. The more toxic, the more we're on it. So I actually have quite a few board members here in the audience. Gretchen from Tuolumne County, Alexa from San Francisco. And so we primarily represent local government. Today I'll be talking about some of the local ordinances and things that are being discussed with local governments here in California and beyond. Also, again, thanks to our funders and our supporters that help us, continue the work that we do. So our goal at CPSC is actually to shift the cost burden from local government to a system that is fairly funded by the producers. So looking at what we typically call extended producer responsibility and product stewardship, which I will define in a few slides, but those are our areas of expertise. These are the opportunities to help our local governments who have been managing our waste systems for 100+ years into driving into a system that isn't reliant on waste and is more technologically advanced so that we can actually manage these materials sustainably. The system as it is right now is our local governments just have to deal with whatever materials come to them. So we want to be more active into what materials are we putting on the market, what materials are we consuming in our homes and putting on our bodies, and what materials are entering the waste stream and how do we work with those. So we work along the supply system, but ideally getting the producers involved with the end-of-life solutions. So in 2007, CalRecycle put out their strategic directive, and under Directive 5 was their producer responsibility clause, which is seeking a system of cradle-to-cradle products that are producer-financed and producer-managed programs. And that's the key difference for extended producer responsibility and product stewardship. Product stewardship is when a company voluntarily helps take stuff back, they're stewards of their products, they're stewards of what they put onto the market. When that is not enough, and believe me, we are at the point where voluntary action is not enough, then we come to what a policy option is called extended producer responsibility. That's when the producers fully finance the end-of-life management, they're responsible for managing the materials, recycling and disposing of the materials, and the philosophy is that if you internalize the external cost, if you make them pay for the management and end of life, it then becomes part of their business model. It then becomes part of their bottom line. So that's what are the philosophies behind extended producer responsibility. But is that the only option? No. What we're going to talk about today are, which realm and which sector of textiles is most impactful to regulate, and which are sectors of the industry that are doing very well regulating themselves. So the CPSC was very successful, and we've grown beyond, we can only do so much work in California when other states need to lead. So we've grown into a 501c4, which is the National Stewardship Action Council, also known as NSAC, and they were the ones who organized the Aquafil tour this morning. So the National Stewardship Action Council, very active as well in policy and piloting and working with manufacturers. And we were recently at the Textile Exchange conference in Vancouver, talking about recycled polyester, microfibers, talking about carpet, as just some examples of policies that influence the textiles and clothing industry. So here's just a simple list of problems, right? This is kind of recapping what we've heard for the beginning of the day, and a lot of things many of you already know. Just the increasing volume of waste. We have lack of recyclability. Things are blended, we have extra chemicals, we have extra additives, findings that are just decreasing the ability to recycle them, even if we were to collect them. The inability to identify and sort hazardous substances. Many of you might have heard what the PFAS, so the perfluoroalkyls. These are an increasing topic of concern. We've already talked about it in terms of carpet, but we are seeing them in textiles and clothing. Just next week, on December 9th, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, DTSC, will be hosting a workshop on PFAS in textiles. So again, the government is aware that this is a problem. I got an email this morning that the International Ski Association just banned PFAS from the ski wax. So many of the manufacturers and producers in this room and webcast are in the ski industry and outdoor industry. So making that connection with maybe the chemicals are in some of the products linked to these forever chemicals like PFAS, silver, often associated with our industry. Microfibers, chemical washout, again, this is something most of us are familiar with, and we'll talk a little bit about how we can actually regulate these. Item number 7, maybe a lot of you don't actually make this connection, but this problem with lithium-ion batteries, something very common in the waste industry, is actually really applicable to wearable technology and a lot of the clothing that are adding technology into them. So as we start talking about regulations, know that batteries might be regulated, which could then in turn affect the textiles and clothing industry. So being aware of the waste industry and being aware of the problems in waste, going beyond just your one product type, will give you a more holistic vision of the problems and how we can solve them. The other thing we talked about is the collection infrastructure. So textiles and clothing is one of the oldest industries that has reuse and thrift and secondhand, where the collection infrastructure has been established. Some of these pictures that I have up here are actually showing how a lot of historical paper, ancient paper making processes were made from recycled fibers, linen, cotton, processed, turned into paper. And this is ancient times. So how can we, in this modern times, utilize similar approaches to get the most value out of our collection? And when we talk about this in some of the other products that are regulated, like for carpet and for mattresses, we call this convenient collection. What is the level of convenience that the consumers need to participate in a program? And with textiles and clothing, we have a different product than other types of in the waste stream. Not only is it easy to deconstruct, has opportunities for repurposing, it actually has a really high value stratification. So when you divert your used textiles, your Gucci's, your designer clothes are gonna hold a lot of higher value, and in that same waste stream, you could have something worth nothing. So the question is, once we divert the high value products, what we're left with are the things no one wants. And so I travel the world and I go to these really academic conferences and we sit around and we talk about single socks and dirty underwear. The things no one wants to talk about, no one wants to donate, but these are the things that are not valued. So how can we get a system that collects and processes these low value to keep them out of the landfill and to keep them perpetually in the economy? So what types of policies would actually drive that circularity? I would actually like to point out before I move on that we have an entire collection system. Although we do have a lot of thrifts and a lot of secondhand, we're leaving them with the trash burden. So when people donate their dirty socks, then they donate their ripped clothes, it is then now a burden on these nonprofits and these secondhand stores. And so again, we need to shift that burden off the taxpayers, off the nonprofits, and into the upstream. So how do we do that? How do we drive that circularity? So here we have the typical waste hierarchy. I actually pulled this from Canada. The Canadian waste hierarchy is a little more extensive than the one California uses. And I added that top line, regenerative. Because at the end of the day, doing less bad is not enough. We actually have to mitigate the damage. We actually have to improve the world. And that's what we mean by regenerative. I love that other presenters have used this word because that's the next step into actually improving the damages we've done. So what are the goals of a policy? Like if we introduce a policy, what are we trying to achieve? So obviously source reduction, as I'll go on to talk about, is one of the top priorities. Reducing your waste, reducing your consumption, and even in that manufacturing processes, reducing the toxics, reducing the chemicals, reducing the resources needed per product. Design for recyclability. Again, recycling is not enough. We need regenerative manufacturing processes, ones that not only take the plastic from the earth, but help preserve ecosystems, rebuild ecosystems that are damaged. And actually implementing producer responsibility. At this point, like we said, our local governments have been bearing the waste burden for 100+ years. So as we move forward into a system where we try to have zero waste, circular economy, where does the responsibility, who needs to come to the table? And one saying that we have at CPSC is, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So we always encourage producers, manufacturers, those of you who are aware of what's going on, to get ahead of the curve, get ahead of the problem. So there are opportunities, both voluntary and less preferable mandatory. A great example of voluntary would be what the Textile Exchange is doing. So this is a voluntary group standard trying to achieve climate neutrality, looking to reduce their carbon emissions. And Textile Exchange is one of the largest industry groups that has some of the largest brands. So again, moving the needle as a whole, like moving the needle as an industry. So not waiting for the stragglers to keep up. What's key about this type of initiative is keeping the industry moving instead of just waiting for the latecomers and the laggers. Some other examples, these are going to be mandated policies. So in Canada, there are 3 different municipalities that have ordinances directly related to textiles. Colchester has curbside textile collection. So what they do there is they have a dry fiber bag. It's clear, it has paper, and it has clothing. So like in San Jose and a couple other jurisdictions, some of them commingle in your single stream, which actually renders it contaminated, and often, like we talked about, once it gets to the MRF, it's really hard to segregate it. So although they have that here in a couple jurisdictions, it's not necessarily an ordinance, and they run into a lot of issues with cost, contamination, and segregation. The city of Markham, also near Toronto, they actually banned the textiles from the curbside collection. So no textiles are allowed in your curbside bins. Another saying that we have at CPSC is no ban without a plan. So what happens, you ban them from doing something that is natural and kind of common sense. What happens then is you have illegal dumping. So what the city of Markham experienced went by banning it. They had a lot of illegal dumping of clothing, just either on the sidewalks, around town, and they had a lot of illegal collection, unauthorized collection bins started popping up around the city. So what the city of Markham actually did was similar to what the city of Halifax did, was actually city-controlled collection bins, meaning the clothing collection bins around the city were branded by the city and managed and placed by the city. But there were authorized nonprofits actually servicing and emptying the bins. They had to be a 501c3 nonprofit. They had to apply for the city, through the city, and the city actually assigned them a particular bin that was theirs. So it was one way to kind of work with partnerships and to address some of the collection costs. But at the end of the day, all 3 of these ordinances were extremely expensive. The results were source reduction is the answer. Every single one of these policies were funded by taxpayers. Every single one of these programs grew in cost the longer and longer they were implemented. Another example would be CalRecycle, which is a partnership, kind of a campaign that's in King County. So again, King County had an ordinance that says we want to do city-controlled collection sites. And what they found was that it was extremely expensive. You're collecting, you're managing, you're disposing of a product that was not previously segregated. So what happened is once King County started this program, as a way to reduce their costs, was they actually launched an education campaign called CalRecycle. CalRecycle not only has the authorized drop-off locations, it has a huge reuse, repair, and kind of upstream source reduction component of it. Big part of the education campaign of CalRecycle is where can you go to mend your clothes? Where can you go to learn to mend your clothes? Where are local clothing swaps in your neighborhood? Or maybe there are product-specific clothing swaps. As someone who's an avid snowboarder, I would more likely attend a snow-specific clothing swap as opposed to, something that's a more general. So a big part of the campaign was really looking at source reduction and educating the consumers as to how they can participate in a circular economy and not buying more and more clothing. But similar to the Canadian ordinances, the lessons learned was that these programs are extremely expensive. And source reduction and actually reducing the waste entering the stream is the best approach to actually managing these materials. So here we have the waste hierarchy, and what I've done is actually put these ordinances onto the waste hierarchy so you can see kind of where they lie. And if our goal is regenerative and our goal is source reduction, what are the best options to actually address these? So Textile Exchange, where they are redesigning their material sourcing, and they're working with brands to redesign the garments. ThreadCycle, looking at a campaign specifically aimed at reducing consumption and reducing waste. And then if you look further down the waste hierarchy, you do see more of the bans and the curbside collection, which are great, but they don't get us to our ultimate goal of a circular economy. Because at the end of the day, like we said, recycling is not enough, recycling is very expensive, and nobody wants to pay for it. So what can we do with this issue of increasing consumption, decreased utilization per garment? But what we do is we have an opportunity to work together with our agencies, with nonprofits and NGOs, and the brands to actually come up with a system, not just a garment, but a system that allows us to clothe ourselves without guilt and to send our garments on to their further life cycle with no concern over, is this the right place? Did I put it? Is this the bin? Is that the bin? And that's what we mean by convenient collection. It has to be easy and understandable to the consumers on how they can participate. So here's the list a lot of people have been waiting for. So what are some of the ordinances that are under discussion? What are local jurisdictions? If we at CPSC represent a majority of the local governments in California, what are our associates talking about? What are some of the considerations, not just here in California, but things we've heard from other states and other jurisdictions as considerable approaches to addressing textile waste? So first and foremost, Assemblymember Bloom has had 2 bills here in California. 129, which was a directive to OPC to incorporate some best practices into their strategy and to incorporate laundry filtration onto state agencies using laundry. And then that one is still active, correct, Robert? So when the session starts in January, it'd be a really interesting one to follow. Bloom also did a previous bill, 2379, which did not go past 2018, and this was a bill looking at labeling the micro-shedding, the microfiber shed. So again, microfibers, hot topic. We have another slide on talking about, where does the science relate to the policy? Recycled content standards, we know this is something that Textile Exchange works on. A lot of manufacturers are trying to meet that standard, but if we don't have a mandated standard, we're always going to be adhering to the lowest quality or the lowest standard. So when you implement standards, whether it's recycled content standards, labeling standards, the goal is, again, to move the needle. Where is the industry going, and how do we get those late adopters to actually move forward into this kind of circular economy? Again, bans on curbside collection, bans on landfill. We don't tend to support those unless there is a supplemental plan, whether it's a mandatory take-back, whether it's a stewardship organization. Again, no ban without a plan means you don't just tell people no. You tell them how they can participate and how they can actually remedy the situation. Number 8, let's see, the perfluoroalkyls, these are the PFAS, also looking at silver, other chemicals that wash off, DWR, looking at water repellency. These are all chemicals that are added on different stages of the manufacturing process, but oftentimes wash out in your home laundry. And for those of you who don't know, a lot of wastewater treatment plants are not equipped to removing PFAS, silver, et cetera. So again, looking at how we can address these concerns, and PFAS being one of the top concerns. With the e-waste and lithium-ion batteries, I promise you this is a problem. We have seen them in airlines and the news, but when you have a Google alert for dump truck fires, you will be surprised by how many of those fires are started by batteries. So again, this is not only just part of education and educating people that batteries don't go in the landfill, but there's also a responsibility that needs to be put on the manufacturers who are putting these batteries and embedding them into these products that can't be removed, are maybe not labeled. So again, it's a major concern in the waste industry, and there are bills active on this. Let's see, there's a bill 1509 addressing lithium-ion batteries. So again, if you make products that put lithium-ion batteries in your garments, this could be a bill that would impact your manufacturing. So at CPSC, we work with local jurisdictions, we work with local governments, we work with companies, we work with recyclers. Again, we have a relationship with Aquafil. There's also several other recyclers here in the Sacramento area. There's an electronics recycler out at Mather. There's a polyester recycler, Circular Polymers, outside in Lincoln. So we have the infrastructure to recycle. We're just really looking at kind of closing the loop. So if you're interested in kind of working with CPSC, putting you in contact with a recycler, putting you in contact with a local government you would like to pilot something with, that's definitely something we can do. But as we move forward, knowing that the science is out there, the science on the PFAS are out there, the science on the microfibers are out there, and it's growing quickly. The pressure is growing quickly. And when you have policymakers who hearing from their constituents, what are you doing for microfibers? What are you doing on PFAS? The pressure is growing to actually do something. And this is the moment when we advocate to the companies and the consumers that are listening today to get involved in the legislation process, to find an NGO or to get a government affair official to attend the meetings, attend the hearings, and to submit your public comment. We do live in a democracy after all, and your inputs are very valued in the legislative process. So again, with the politics of microfibers, the policy is not gonna wait for perfect science. But the science is out there that it's a problem. The science is out there that it is linked to textiles. Whether it's 100% or not, the policy doesn't wait for that. So again, be ahead of the problem. Get involved and advocate for the solution. And I promise you, especially with the Bloom bill and more interest in microfibers coming up, that it will be a topic in the legislature, not only in 2020, but beyond. So here we have the Ellen MacArthur circular economy graphic. And so we ask, the question is, where should we introduce policies? And really, as we've learned from the previous presentations, the biggest impact are gonna be from phases 1 and 2, the upstream changes, looking at what chemicals you use, the emissions and the chemicals of concern and the utilization. So pre-consumption will have the biggest impact in terms of intervening and driving that circular economy. Steps 3 and 4 on this particular graphic, still very impactful, but gonna be very expensive. So radically improving recycling, there are people who've been trying to do that for years and they're close, a couple $100 million deep and a few years into it, and they're close. So again, this isn't something, steps 3 and 4 aren't something you can just do overnight. So we recommend getting involved, especially with phases 1 and 2, in terms of driving a circular economy and where we can have the most impact for policy. So we do like to leave everyone on a positive note. So what can you do to help? So again, for those of you who in this room and on the webcast do design products, are involved in the manufacturing process, we encourage you to design for recyclability, design for the environment. to take the social and environmental externalized costs and build them into your product and into your product price, making products more durable, making sure they don't have as large impact on the manufacturing and on the earth, labeling your products. You know, there's a lot of talk about education to the consumers, and labeling is gonna be your greatest interface with your products and your consumers. So making sure that what efforts you've done to make your products sustainable are communicated on your labels, whether it's recycled content, whether it's, you know, low impact dyes, these things matter. And another thing that could be a possibility, we talked about eco fees. Actually, in a recent bill that the National Stewardship Action Council passed on carpet just this last September, was the first precedent of eco-modulated fees. So with carpet in California, you pay a fee when you buy the product, and that fee goes towards the recycling and end-of-life management. The problem was some carpets are more recyclable, easy to recycle, less costly to recycle than others. So what AB 729 did was set a precedent on eco-modulated fees so that the carpets that have a higher impact on the earth, that are more costly to recycle, have a higher fee than those who don't. This is not only important for the cost of the program, this is extremely important for communicating to the consumers which products are truly greener and which products truly cost more for our economy to bear the burden. So again, eco-modulated fees are an option. So one way that companies can really get ahead of the problem, starting your own take-back program, or joining a stewardship organization who is already doing a take-back program. You can collaborate and advocate during legislation. If you have a great idea for legislation, we encourage you to come talk to us. This is something that we do as part of our mission, is to introduce legislation, again, that reduce the burden from the local government. So if we have someone in the room or on the webcast interested in getting involved, we encourage you to contact us. And also looking to support organizations and associations leading the way. Looking at Textile Exchange, Californians Against Waste, the National Stewardship Action Council. These are just a few examples that I just see scanning across the room. But again, really great opportunities for individuals or companies to get involved in the legislative process and to get ahead of the problem. That's all I have. I'm a little ahead of time, but I know we have the World Cafe coming up, so we can take questions now or then. I'm not sure how you want to. Okay.
Thank you. Can we give Joanna a round of applause? We have time for a few questions. If anyone, I think Isaac in the back and.
Oh, you do. Yes.
Where are we at with the Bloom Act? And can we change the word microfiber to fiber fragments throughout that write-up? Thank you, Crystal, for instructing us all on that a few weeks ago.
Yeah, so it was held in one of the committees, and so when the legislative session starts in January, it'll likely get pulled to that same committee, which I believe is ESTM, which is Environmental Safety Toxics Committee. So that would be one opportunity for you to either submit a letter, to submit a public comment. You can also contact authors directly. It's another great way to get involved. You can also email us. We have a relationship, so we can arrange meetings.
Hi, Stan Philippi. I retired Cal EPA years ago. Is anyone seeing the middleman, the retailer? I walk through Costco and I see stacks and stacks of fleeces and such. Is anyone working to urge the middleman to back that stuff out of their product line? It makes it just too easy for somebody walking through the store to snag a article of clothing that they may not have even wanted.
I'm not aware of any type of retail standards in terms of what they can sell, but I know there's some talk of mandatory retail take-back, so making all the retailers have a collection site. There have been discussion, the previous Bloom bill was a microfiber labeling bill, so that one did not pass, but that would be one example of an attempt to kind of publicize that certain fibers and fabrics have that shedding ability.
What do you think about tipping fees and increasing them? For example, there's a recycler in Oakland. He sends 4 containerfuls, the extra long ones, down to LA to the landfill there because it's too expensive in Alameda County to dump them there.
That's a tough question because there's a lot of politics in this. I know the tipping fees really haven't been raised in quite a few decades maybe, so that is something that is being discussed. Our mission in particular is actually to kind of go away from a system that's reliant on end-of-life payments. So paying at the recycling or paying at the tipping fee, we don't really feel is the solution. Whereas if you pay either upfront, and whether it's internalized into your cost of the product or it's a visible fee, when you pay upfront, you're more likely to actually recycle it at the end of life. When we have the fees at the end, that's when you're gonna have more illegal dumping. So if you have to pay to dispose of something, or you can set it here on the ground for free, we do see a lot more illegal dumping when you pay the fee at the end of life, as opposed to the point of purchase. Not really my goal.
Hi, Patty Breslin, Reuse Alliance. So I have a concern about product takebacks in that, there's no reason why those same products can't just be bailed up and shipped off to other places, just like so much of what we have now. So I don't know if there's thinking around that.
I think a lot of the thinking kind of comes around the cost of collection, cost of bailing, and cost of actually sending it to the recycler. So kind of internalizing that cost into those who are selling it. But again, these are all discussions. So whether a mandatory take-back is individual retailers, whether it incorporates a stewardship program, there are a lot of different opportunities on how that would actually take shape. But the idea is to not rely on a single stream collection. So looking at other sources to collect, other avenues to collect.
Hey, Joanne.
Hi.
Kevin Miller, City of Napa. Before I ask my question, I think the answer is both upfront and back end, because governments have to respond to the cost of disposal versus any other diversion program. So if it's not there, disposing is artificially cheap. So you really want both. But my question is about the eco-modulation, which I think is the future, but who's the independent arbiter of that that's going to decide? How do you envision that model?
So with that particular example, the program is actually run by a stewardship organization. So the stewardship organization would set the rules on how they're modulated. They would actually do the modulating themselves. There would be some sort of enforcement. I believe CalRecycle is involved with the enforcement and regulations. But for that particular example, it would be the stewardship organization running and collecting the money.
I have 2 things. I just wanted to respond in part to your question about take-back programs, and that it's actually setting us up for a much longer-term circularity model, that it's not just about the articles that are going into the bins today, but it's about setting us up as a consumer system to take back our garments and get them back into circularity. So it's not just a drop-off thing. It's actually getting it back into circulation.
So there's going to be requirement to. So you're saying that there will be a requirement to make sure that those things that are dropped off are dealt with responsibly?
I don't know that it'll be a requirement, but I do know that that is in large part what a lot of these take-back schemes are headed towards, is they're not just taking it back to use the garment as a garment in a second life. They're actually taking it back to be able to recoup that fiber in a circular model to reuse it again and again and again. And setting up collection bins is just the first step of taking us all towards a circular model. So it's just the beginning, but we have to start somewhere. So that I just wanted to add to that answer. But my question for you, Dr. Brasch, is, and I think you may know where I'm headed with this, is do you think that these eco-modulation fees may be a way to promote preferred fibers in conversations that you and I have had potentially? Is this maybe a way to incentivize not just consumers, but companies as well to use preferred fibers over non-preferred fibers over conventional? Is this another tool in our chest of how we could promote the use of preferred fibers?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you have a front-facing visible fee, not only does it educate the customer, but actually could impact their sales. So when a product is going to repeatedly have that high fee, they could face either reduced sales, they could face, public backlash as to, why don't you have the lower fee when, this brand with a similar jacket does? So absolutely, it's going to incentivize more and more companies to aim for that lower tier, which would be the greenest tier or the lowest cost fee.
Thank you for your presentation, Rebecca Burgess, Fibershed. I just had a question about how the extended producer responsibility, would be determined. Is that, again, you mentioned a stewardship group would potentially, through potentially CalRecycle, look at eco-modulation. Is that the same government agency that would even, define an extended producer responsibility fee, I guess, in this case?
So it all depends on how the law is written. But typically, both producer responsibility programs and product stewardship programs are not run by CalRecycle. And that's one of the philosophies, is that if it's a producer-run program, they're the ones handling the products. They're the ones managing the recycling, et cetera. So it depends all on how it's written, but typically, one of these EPR programs or product stewardship programs have a third party or a stewardship organization. In several of the bills here in California, we require that organization's a 501c nonprofit. So that nonprofit is the one, producers pay into it, the nonprofit is the one who manages the program. So for example, with carpet, the stewardship program is called CARE, Carpet America Recovery Effort. For mattresses, the stewardship program is called MRC, Mattress Recovery Council. So if there was to be a law, an EPR law on textiles and clothing, there would typically be a mandate to incorporate or actually utilize a stewardship organization to run the program. So CalRecycle is just the one enforcing and kind of checks and balances those organizations, but the money doesn't ever come to CalRecycle. The money goes straight to the organization running the program.
Thank you. And just one last question related to that. In an implemented vision, how do you see, given textiles and the complexity of the retailer versus there's like REI aggregates from multiple brands, you have Patagonia selling their own. How do you see something like that implemented in a state where corporate headquarters for the brands are here, but the supply chains are overseas, and then you have amalgam businesses?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It gets really complicated. And as you can imagine, pharmaceuticals are really complicated as well. So the way they are typically written, the EPR programs are kind of laid out on who the responsible party is. First being the producer. If the producer's not in California, not adhering or isn't, participating in the program, it would be the importer. If the importer is not in California or participating in the program, the third responsible party, I believe, is the distributor. So again, it's written in the law, so that if one person isn't taking responsibility, someone is.
Thank you.
Hi, Andrew with MXV Ventures. I have a question. Across the regulatory landscape, from municipalities up to international, legally speaking, impact-wise, where are the biggest opportunities? Where are legislators' hands held? Is there international efforts? Kind of where is maybe the state level the sweet spot for impact? What are your opinions with that?
Ooh, that's a good question. If I go back to these ones, I'd say the biggest impact would be phases 1 and 2. So the manufacturing, the upstream. If I can also go back to this, list are some good examples of how we can have impact without, taking the whole pie. Like when you look at textiles and apparel, it's so big of an industry. And again, fashion is just one part of it. So if we're regulating protective clothing, if we're regulating automobiles, there are going to be different policies. And we often talk about things in iteration. So not looking for the perfect policy in the first try, but getting somewhere where we can address toxics in one bill, or looking at the modulated fees to kind of drive those upstream changes. So where I think the biggest impact would be to regulate upstream, to shift that cost burden. Is that the lowest hanging fruit? Probably not. I think there might be easier ordinances and easier laws to pass. But if you're looking for that sweet spot and that most impact, it would be in the manufacturing phases.
Okay, thank you.
I think we only have time for one more question, and yeah.
I actually have a question on the microfiber, the number one, the slide you were just on. So at our conference, we visited a plastics lab in Vancouver. And one of the huge learnings I had is that during the, I don't know which year it was, or if it was in the United States or in Canada, but at one point, washing machines were designed with a filter in the washing machine. And then it broke too many washing machines. Consumers got lazy to change the filter. It would block the machine, and the machine went to fritz. So brands just took out that filter again because they could, and nobody stopped them from funneling all of this into the wastewater or into the environment. So knowing that the design solution is potentially already there, what would it take from a legislative standpoint to require washing machine manufacturers to make that filter mandatory, for example? Like there are regulations around your car cannot emit anything and everything, so maybe a washing machine also cannot emit everything and anything, but
Yeah.
I'm sure there's complexity around it. I just am curious what it is.
If my bill's correct. So the 129, the Bloom bill, does have a component on it that would require filtration systems on all laundry for state agencies. So again, on how we regulate and who we regulate can be a little complicated. So there are local jurisdictions looking at any new washing machine installed would have a filtration system added. Whether that passes or, that's another question. At the state level, they're looking at regulating either public agencies, commercial laundry, so looking at sector at a time. Again, when you look for the big pie in the sky, you're looking at a really heavy lift. So there is momentum at the local level. There is momentum at specific sectors of laundry, but there hasn't been a lot of traction across all washing machines yet.
Great. So Roberta, do you want to come up and explain the World Cafe? And then